welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'm going to be carrying on reviewing the Empire of Normality from where I left off last time. This is now part 3 of reviewing this book, Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman, Neurodiversity and Capitalism. So if you want to know where I am on this, go and check out part 1 and 2, so we're now on to part 3. Okay, so I got up to the bit where he started to he mentioned ancient Greek Hippocratic doctors saw health as a form of balance. So this is important because Chapman needed to show how this had ended with the rise of capitalism, essentially. So prior to capitalism, the dominant way of viewing health was as a form of balance, which was the sort of Hippocratic idea of humours in the body and how they were in balance or out of balance, and that would determine whether or not someone was in a state of health or a state of imbalance, a state of illness. And so this was a sort of sense of internal sort of balance or imbalance, but also this could also be influenced by the external environment as well, and a person's relationship with their environment. So Chapman argues that this ended with the rise of capitalism, and where under capitalism humans were increasingly reinterpreted as machines, competing with one another as sort of machines that either worked well or were broken and didn't work well. And Chapman argues that this led to the concept of normality, involving a ranking system, a sort of hierarchy, and controlling populations. And that normality began to seem timeless and objective, obscuring its material genesis and contingency. So Chapman argues that the conception of normality was essentially a construct that arose during the birth of capitalism, that was trying to sort of rank populations in order to control them. I mean, yeah, I don't really agree with that, really. I agree that obviously the birth of capitalism did result in a greater need to control populations. That much I can see, and you know, for rise in sort of state bureaucracies, ranking and controlling, all of that is very very true. But the idea that somehow normality began to seem timeless and objective with the birth of capitalism, implying that somehow that it wasn't timeless and objective before that point, no, I don't agree with. I mean, humans have always had a kind of notion of normality, and what they see as outside of the norm has always been punished. There's always been a sense of normality as timeless and objective. I don't see how that arose with the birth of capitalism, but capitalism was different to other systems in a way in which it could be more ruthless in its kind of ranking and controlling populations, because of course it had the state apparatus now to do that in a way that prior populations didn't. So yeah, so anyway, so Chapman then talks about the paradigm, what he calls the pathology paradigm, and he sees the pathology paradigm as arising with the birth of capitalism. And he says that the pathology paradigm proper can be traced to Francis Galton, who's the father of eugenics. Galton compared cognition using a Darwinian ranking system. And this pathology paradigm was then taken up and expanded by influential psychiatrists, because also, of course, psychiatry, the discipline of psychiatry itself, was very much arose sort of, really kind of like it was very much was very, what am I trying to say? The birth of capitalism. Sorry, what am I trying to say? My words have all got twisted. Yeah, psychiatry itself being a product of a modern era, essentially. Like, it didn't exist before that point, not in a sort of organised sort of way. It's a very young science. So the Galtonian pathology paradigm was taken up and expanded by influential psychiatrists, and the broader eugenic ideology became culturally dominant. Galton was the founder of the current... Okay, this is what Chapman argues, by the way. He argues that Galton was the founder of the currently dominant scientific paradigm used in psychiatry. So he traces the dominant scientific paradigm used in psychiatry all the way back to Galton. Now that's quite a claim, that is, and that is a controversial claim. I don't really 100% agree with it. I think that's rather, it's a kind of sweeping claim to make. Like, psychiatry has changed massively since that time. And to link current psychiatry back to a eugenicist, I just feel is a bit kind of, I don't know, I'm sceptical. I mean, yeah, I'm sceptical. I think that this is a claim which needs to be further evidenced and verified. Without that further verification, I'm going to treat it as something to be taken with a very strong amount of scepticism. I'm not denying that modern psychiatry doesn't have. I'm not denying that psychiatry itself has not had links with eugenics movement. It has undoubtedly so, but it's a massive claim to jump from that to imply that modern psychiatry is tainted by eugenics. That's kind of quite a claim, and I'm not sure I really agree with that. Anyway, he then talks about how neurodivergent activism has been co-opted by capitalist structures to maintain the status quo. For example, neurodiversity consultants charge large sums of money to speak to businesses, who then see neurodivergent people as new resources to be mined for productivity. And he calls this the rise of neurofactorism. I think neurofactorism being a term that Chapman himself has coined. I like that, by the way, the rise of neurofactorism. It's an interesting way of putting it. So this is where capitalism has subverted attempts to resist its harmful effects, turning these attempts back into new opportunities for the maximisation of profit. So neurofactorism is where capitalism sort of harvests, if you like, autistic people or people with other neurological conditions. It harvests those who have skills that capitalism sees as profitable, while of course abandoning everyone else. So it cherry picks the sort of creme de la creme, those who are seen as having specific skills that can be exploited, and Chapman calls that neurofactorism. Yeah, and I agree with that analysis. I think capitalism has been doing this. I think capitalism has definitely co-opted neurodiversity in order to try and make a profit. You can see that a lot, so I agree with him there, definitely. And he also talks about how the anti-psychiatry movement is now growing in popularity again, and this sees psychiatry itself as the core problem. whereas Chapman does not see psychiatry itself as the core problem. He sees the structures in society, the sort of capitalist structures in society, as being the problem, which can then obviously then corrupt psychiatry, but he doesn't see psychiatry itself as the problem. He's not an anti-psychiatrist. He mentions the work of a right-wing libertarian, Thomas Satz, and he makes it very clear that he's thoroughly against Satz's position. And I would agree with him. I am myself very, very anti-psychiatry. Then Chapman says that what he calls disablement and illness have increased under the material relations of capitalism. And I mentioned this in my previous video, how undoubtedly capitalist practices have increased stress and mental illness, particularly the sort of neoliberal versions of capitalism, and greater inequality. But as I said in my previous video, that doesn't mean that capitalism in itself has resulted in greater amounts of mental illness than what you see in previous systems. The idea that somehow feudalism was a more mentally healthy way of society, I don't agree with. Capitalism is certainly not great for mental health, and obviously, certain ways of organising society under capitalism, which are very unnatural, and the way we've lost touch with the natural world and the rhythms of the natural world, and the increased, noise and all of that, has obviously put a great deal of stress on people, because we just haven't evolved to deal with this way of living. But that doesn't mean that feudalism itself was any better, That's where I disagree. I'm not sure that Chapman is arguing that feudalism was better than capitalism. I don't think he's arguing that, but there are certain parts in the book where it does imply that the earlier ways of living were better for mental health, and I think that's rather unfounded as a claim, and I don't really agree with that. Anyway. So then he talks about those aspects of our species. Those aspects of our species, so the wide neurocognitive diversity capitalism cannot currently use, are then disenabled, devalued and discriminated against. And then he says, this then becomes a situation where we all become sick or disabled, where our well-being is elusive for most of us. Now that's a big claim. I don't think it's a case of we all become sick or disabled. I think I disagree with that because I feel that risks trivialising disability. Like, it's almost like saying everyone's autistic. It's a similar sort of thing. We all become disabled. Well, no, disability is a very specific situation, protected by law. Most people are not disabled, are they? Because if everyone was disabled, society would be quite different, clearly. But obviously, anyone can become disabled at any time. Disability is something that can affect anyone at any time. No one's immune to becoming disabled. Just because someone isn't disabled right now doesn't mean they're not going to be disabled tomorrow. And just because capitalism might increase the rates of sickness and mental illness, which I've just said is, under neoliberalism, you could certainly, a relative say to other forms of capitalism. I'm not comparing capitalism with feudalism. I think feudalism was worse than capitalism. Any idea that feudalism was somehow a golden age is just wishful thinking. I'm saying that I'm talking about neoliberal capitalism, say relative to sort of welfare capitalism or sort of more regulated capitalism. It's undoubtedly the case that mental illness has increased. There's been lots of studies showing this, and more unequal societies have greater rates of mental illness. But it's a massive leap to go from that to say that everyone is sick or disabled. That trivialises, diminishes the experiences of those who actually really are disabled, and I find that a bit offensive. I don't know whether he was just doing that in a kind of I'm not sure how seriously to take how serious he was being with that claim, but it just seems very far-fetched, and I just don't agree with that. Certainly well-being might be elusive for most of us, but that doesn't mean everyone's disabled. I'm disabled. Disability is a very specific thing, isn't it? That's why saying everyone's autistic. I mean, no, just no. Anyway, I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on discussing empath normality. So moving over to the next video now.